anybody that bought oil for this phase here, anybody that bought oil, regardless of whether you think they should or whether you think they shouldn't, every single one of those guys that's a professional will have this price here as a target price area. So straight away, my first thoughts are there's a possibility that there's going to be a sell into that area, right? Well, guess what, guys? What do you think that is? What do you think those pins are at the very top edge? So when you think about it from a bracket to bracket phenomenon, this is not even remotely even a surprise, Wayne, anymore, is it? We've got macro calendar spread value. We've got the dollar macro spread value. We've got the measured move for all the guys that were in the US session on Friday. And all of a sudden you can see that, and it's just made this perfect little swing trade to that macro price on Sunday night, which is brilliant, isn't it? Session directionality is one of the easiest and one of the most obvious things you must be doing. And as I said, we did it on S&P the other day, when we were talking about it, because we had the SPX contract, and we says, right, always do your day projections as a minimum. Do your day projections on these charts, and if you did that, you already knew that 69.60s, 69.50s was going to be a sell price. It's called a guaranteed premium. Yes? Guaranteed premium is a bracket extension to the upside or a bracket extension to the downside. So when you look at that bracket extension to the upside, you go, well, with a guaranteed premium and significant amounts, with a guaranteed premium and significant amounts of downside macro value, this seems to be a great opportunity to get some short business. And as I said, when you look back at that trade and you think to yourself, that was so fecking easy, it was unbelievable. And you see that that's so fecking easy ultimately resulted in just under, literally just under a $2,000 move. By the time it reached the very, very bottom price, you've got to be looking at that saying that's the trade of the week already. That has to be the trade of the week. Look at that trade, guys. Just under $2,000. So when you look at these structures, you know, the day structure for the WTI session and the day structure for the Brent session are very, very important structures regardless, aren't they? Because when we look at Brent, we do the same thing. Every day we come into the charts, we come in with a structure. Every session we come in with a structure, because when we come into the Brent set structure, for example, we start at 8 o'clock and we see where the Brent high is. And when we see where the Brent low is, coming into 2 o'clock, we have a structure. So we come into the 2 o'clock, and the new structure is going to be the WTI structure, of course, but there's the Brent session lows at that stage there. So we need to know those prices. They're incredibly important, aren't they? But for the WTI markets, more important to us is what happens after 1400 hours. The 1400 hours low, and then the US session highs, that becomes a new structure just there. The smaller, and the reason why this is important is because the smaller the UK section, we've told you this before, what happens if we've got a UK range that's around about 50 ticks? We'd expect to see a bigger US range. If we've got a UK range that's about 100 ticks, we expect to see a smaller US range because the market's already used up all the value. So when I see a market like the London session, and in this occasion it went from 40s to 90s, it's about 50 ticks. So to me that's a small UK session. I expect the US session to expand the bracket, either to the downside in a directionality, to the upside in a directionality, or to both sides. But I'm expecting to see the bracket expanding into the New York session. When we finish that, of course, what happens is we now have a bracket measure, which is quite a sizable bracket measure, but we always keep it in mind for the next day. We always know about this price here, $69.50. The following day, we don't get to that, but we do get to that the next day, don't we? Last night. So we've actually got a measured move also from 2 days ago that we also take into account coming into last night's business at $69.50. It's not as important as the day before because the day before's fresher. However, because this buy trade is still in place, we still have to pay attention to it because obviously if the price had went up and then came back down again, it wouldn't have been still in place. But the buyers that came into this bracket area, if we just assume that the average price was the POC here, those buyers are still in place until we reach $69.50, aren't they? So last night when you saw $69.50, it wasn't just because you had the bracket from the day before, it was because you still had a lot of buyers in from the day before that, which is kind of nice, isn't it? So there was so many buyers that had been in this oil trade that saw this break higher to 69.50 that would have looked at that break higher at 69.50s and thought to themselves, wow, that's an amazing opportunity to do business, right? So what do you think that huge volume is on last night's business? It's all of those guys going, wow, that's a huge opportunity to do some business up here. Huge opportunity to do business when you saw that volume pouring into the oil price at that level. And you think to yourself, with the amount of macro value, plus the fact I've got access to a tweet that told me to do the sell anyway, sell side only, it suddenly kind of makes a lot of sense about these projections, doesn't it? In it, mate, in it. And obviously, once the US POC got taken out, guess what happened? Because obviously with the US POC getting rumbled here, there's a lot of people ended up on the wrong side of this trade, didn't they? And you start to look at that there and say, well, where the hell would this price potentially be going to? And you draw that on your screens. Does anybody see anything interesting? Does anybody see anything interesting on a projection? As if by magic, the extension on the short side ends up bouncing with what? Ends up bouncing with what? Bouncing right off the level with an increase in volume. Boom. Right into the bottom edge. You couldn't make it up, could you? But all you've got to do is look at the day structure. The day structure is just the day high and the day low. Measured move to the upside, measured move to the downside. Every time you've got a new day structure. Now, obviously, if the market goes directional away from that area, you don't have to keep these levels on the screens because they're busted by then. But you still know about them from the day before, right? So when I do this day structure here, for example, I don't just look at the upside in this. I look at the downside as well. So I try and find the measure in this area here, you know, to sit perfectly into this zone. I'm going to do the upside structure and the downside structure, of course. So we start doing those measures on both sides of this trade, just so that we can get a good handle on where we're going to be going to and from and all that kind of stuff. You know, so you just keep an eye on these types of ideas here, for example. But they don't stick around because there's other things happening. There's other trades happening off in the background that we obviously expect. But look at what's happened to that sell coming into this buy trade. All you've done is the day structure from the day before, and you've ended up with this incredible level. Now, why have I not got London structures? Because Brent's not playing today. It's a London bank holiday, so Brent's not playing today. You can see the volumes in the morning session are very, very quiet, but people will still pay attention to it from a structural point of view. So from a UK structure, it's not as important, but from a UK structural point of view, it's basically from 8 o'clock open. It's from the 8 o'clock open, and then you've obviously got your measured move to the downside, and that completes the London bracket to this price here. Once that London bracket's completed, where do you think the price will go to? Well, of course, you've got a couple of ideas already up your sleeve. You probably would imagine that the price will go to somewhere about here at $69.10. And you can see that the price has just traded up to $69.10. $69.10. London bracket structure, isn't it? The London open, London high, the London low, closed the bracket against the opening price just here, gave you a measured move to the $69.10 level. The buyers that bought the London session would be now taking profits into $69.10, wouldn't they? They'd now be taking profits into this area. What happened at that area? We got this huge increase in volumes, interestingly enough, into that London structure high, and there's your sell opportunity just there. Now you might be saying, why did we get these huge volumes? Because it's the WTI Open, of course. Isn't it interesting that the WTI Open happens at the measured move of the London session? Now, obviously, if we had a full-size Brent contract running today, this would have been more significant. But it's still something that you would know about, surely. Yes? No? Does everybody do this? I'm assuming everybody does, based on the fact that we've done a bazillion classes on it. That these are the kind of ideas that we look at: the US Open to the US low, the US Open to the US high, previous day structure highs, previous day structure lows. And seeing these elements, seeing these parts to these elements, because they're important, aren't they? This is the point. They're always going to be important, drawing in market structures. And these are the macro structures. These aren't the individual swing structures. These are the day structures that the big boys use, these types of ideas. You can see that this simple little concept, and it is a simple little concept, is just an incredibly powerful piece of kit. You know, when you start to recognize just how powerful this is in terms of structure, in terms of ideas, and you start drawing these structures in, and you look, when you look at these ideas and you start thinking to yourself, wow, this is absolutely amazing in terms of targets, in terms of everything else, you start to really see the idea behind some of these trade ideas here. Structure. US highs, US lows. It doesn't take a lot of time to write down what you need to know about. US previous day high, previous day low, measured move against those previous day highs and lows. Structure.